There we go. So good news is that we're recording this presentation and it will be available on our website sometime afterwards. So if you want to go back to it and look back at it, that'll hopefully be helpful for you. We are the Successful Start program. We are the financial wellness program here at Boston College. We're really focused on trying to help people have a better relationship with money. To have it not be quite so stressful, not be quite so painful, because it definitely can be for a lot of people. So one thing I want to let people know about is that we have a Peer Money Mentor program. So if you want to have a mentor who you can ask questions about finance or anything related to that, then we're taking applications for that. You can find that on our website, which I'll post in the chat in a few minutes. So please, if that's something that you're interested in, go sign up to be a Peer Money mentee, to have a mentor. Also, last week we did an introductory presentation on budgeting, banking, and credit. And that's something that might be helpful for many of you as well. If you want to see that, that'll be available on our website as well. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass it off to our guest presenter, the Associate Director of the Career Education Program at the Career Center, Julianne Smith.
Thank you so much, Ari. So we've been doing this presentation together for a few years now, which is pretty great. And yeah, I'm Julianne Smith. I'm the Associate Director of Career Education in the Career Center. So if you haven't checked out the Career Center's website, I encourage you to do that. There are a ton of resources there, and there's resources on this specific topic there that you can visit afterwards. But I'm just going to focus today on kind of salary negotiation and negotiating or evaluating an offer. So for the money or budgeting aspect, definitely kind of tune into Successful Start's resources. So maybe we can mute some of the folks, I think, who, sorry, I think there was some background noise. Okay, we're good now. So basically, you're thinking about the point where you get to a job offer. So that's an exciting aspect of one's career journey. And I want to start off with just saying how important it is for you to kind of fully understand the employment package being offered to you before you make a decision. Evaluating an offer isn't always simple, especially if it's the first offer you've ever received. It's critical that you pay attention to other factors besides just the number, that salary, when taking a job offer into consideration. So if you've been given a verbal offer, request it in writing so that you have all the relevant details and you can do the research. So reflecting on your personal and professional goals in advance of getting to that stage will be so helpful so that you can have something to refer to when considering different aspects of this offer. Think about the skills that you want to develop in that next job, where you see yourself in the next few years, and what makes you happy. Ideally, you want to make a decision that is consistent with your values and aspirations, right? Okay. So today we're going to kind of skip over that budgeting part and focus on the other aspects. We're going to cover tips and strategies in the art of negotiating through questions that you can ask, and I'll have kind of scripted answers that we'll practice together. And I will follow up with an email as well with some of these resources. So we'll talk about the first thing, what factors you want to consider when evaluating an offer. We'll talk about why negotiation is important. Why are we even having this conversation? And then fourth, how to even evaluate your worth. So I think that might be the hardest part, is even knowing where to start. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear if anyone wants to volunteer. I can't see a lot of faces right now, or any faces, but what factors do people think are important when considering an employment offer? So what are some things that come to mind?
Vacation time, time off is a very important one.
Absolutely.
Benefits.
Benefits, yeah.
Location.
Yep.
Call them bonus perks, like company phone or car, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Tuition reimbursement.
Yes. Yep.
How much they match for a 401k?
Absolutely. So you all are far ahead of the game. Sometimes I think when we start this conversation, those are kind of the hidden aspects, right? Things that you think about afterwards, but they count for so much, right? Vacation time, how much, if they have a company car, if they're paying your transportation travel, if they will reimburse you for another degree, right? How much money are you actually making through that? So thinking through all these perks is really important. So some common mistakes before we get started here is, you're here, so you're doing your homework, right? You're reading up on this, but not doing your homework, not understanding kind of the industry and what's, normal for entry level or, mid-manager level in specific industries. Another common mistake is disclosing your salary too early in the hiring process. This can be really, really tricky. Especially if it's kind of not your first job, but they're trying to figure out what you made in your previous job. It can be hard to kind of hold that number back, but it's really beneficial to try to hold that number back and have them be the first people or first person to bring up salary. And then focusing on the wrong reasons when you're negotiating, right? So we all have these private needs, right? Say childcare, or all of a sudden there's this extra expense that happened with your house, right? We all have these things going on, but that's never kind of what you want to bring to the table. That's not what you would start with or even bring into a conversation about salary negotiation, right? Not your personal needs. It's really about who you are as an employee, the attributes and contributions that you're going to bring to the team. And your accomplishments, and then really equity, right? So what is the local market paying, right? Is this fair? What are other people getting paid based on the research that you're doing? So it's really about facts and equity, and as much as possible, even though it feels really personal, and it is emotional, trying to kind of understand the facts going into this conversation so that you can have a conversation about your skills and your worth. And it's not focused on some of those more emotional things. Okay, so there are many factors to consider when preparing to negotiate and evaluating your relative worth. People already mentioned a bunch of these, but benefits are a huge factor that covers a lot of things. It's not just health insurance, right? Even though that's huge. Benefits are a huge factor, and sometimes people forget that those can be negotiated sometimes as well. It's not about just the money. Other insights is that it's incredibly important to, if you have any kind of control over this, to surround yourself with great people. So the culture and the climate of the workplace are really important. And I know that current college students, this is really important to students, right? And millennials, folks that have entered the workforce or been in the workforce for about 10 years. So now workplace culture is one of the top things that they're keeping top of mind. But when you're getting out there and you have a number of offers and maybe one salary is higher than the other, it's going to be tempting to take that, but make sure that you're really looking at each offer holistically, and you're thinking about what's going to be meaningful for you as well. So think about responsibilities, right? What are you going to be doing? What is your day going to look like from 9 to 5, or if it's from 7 to 10, or what's your work-life balance like? Is there flexibility within that? I mean, the world is very different at the moment because of COVID, but hopefully at some point we go back to non-COVID times. I won't say normal times, but in terms of flexibility, working from home, that may be incredibly important for you. Thinking about travel. Fun, it's not just about fun, right? I think that would be a wrong reason to take a job because they have a happy hour on Friday afternoons, but it's something to think about. What are people happy in their jobs, right? Do people laugh and talk about personal lives sometimes before meetings get started? These are things to consider. And then exposure and visibility and opportunities to expand, right? Thinking about professional development, not just tuition reimbursement, but Are you going to be a part of professional associations, have the opportunity to go to conferences and network kind of with people outside of your direct department, or even within, if you're working for a big organization? Can you go to meetings with people in other areas? Do they want you to learn and kind of expand your skill set? So those are kind of these abstract things to think about. Benefits, there's a lot. There's a whole website that I'll give you that, will help you kind of understand what benefits should look like, right? And how to compare them. Someone already mentioned it, but 401k versus 403b, pension, sick days, paid time off are incredibly important to understand what you're getting into. Family leave is another thing. I just learned that up here has 14 weeks of paid paternity leave at their organization. And I think that's amazing and unheard of. Most folks don't get any paternity leave. So that's 3 months after, a new child is coming into your life that you get to spend with that child. So knowing going into that job, if you're thinking, hey, kids might be on your mind at some point, wouldn't that be nice to know? Like what are the family leave benefits? So there's other things up here in terms of benefits, but again, I do have a website that will help you kind of think through the health plan and the dental plan and all of those things. We talked a little bit about culture already when I talked about responsibilities, kind of bled into that conversation. But something else to think about is turnover, as well as glass doors and glass ceilings, right? So turnover, there are companies that you can read about online. Glassdoor is one, glassdoor.com is one place you can go to read about different organizations, what it's like to work at those organizations, people's review, employers' reviews. So it's possible that you learn that there's a lot of turnover. People stay for a year and a half, and then they leave. And that's not a good sign. It usually means that there's something a little bit off about the culture. People are burnt out maybe, or there's just agreement with leadership or management or the kind of the organization. So paying attention to, are there people there in this department, in this office who have been there for a long time, right? Are they loyal? Are they committed to that organization? Glass doors, meaning can you go from here to here? Is there room for you to grow in terms of knowledge and content, right? Is there a glass ceiling? So that means you can't ever advance up, right? You don't see that maybe people who look like you aren't getting promoted, right? That's something important to consider. Is it inclusive workplace, right? Thinking about your own identity. Do you see people that kind of could be mentors for you at that organization? These are all things that, should be in your brain as you're interviewing, but when you're really considering that offer, it's some of these more abstract things that are important. And then the boss, this has its own category, right? Most of the time you will know who your manager will be if you're given an offer, and hopefully you've had the opportunity to meet that person and interview with that person. But it's kind of important to think about, is this someone that you admire, that you can see yourself working with really closely, that's interested in your professional development? It's possible that, some, especially entry-level rotational programs, you're not going to know your boss personally when you get that offer, and that's a little bit different. But if you do, right, if you know that manager, taking that into account is kind of important. You want to feel like you're going to be supported in a job that you're about to take. I forgot to mention, if at any point, I will stop at the end for questions, but if people have questions about material, feel free to unmute and ask. Okay, so a big part of this discussion is the salary. And there are some key questions to ask when you are evaluating the salary. The first is whether or not the offered amount of money is enough for you to live on. So if you're not sure right now of how much money you're going to need, consider creating an inventory of expenses, right? So right now, if you are an undergrad or you're a grad and you're about to make that step, maybe you'll be living in Boston, maybe you're looking for jobs in DC, right? It's thinking about, what is your life going to look like in terms of expenses? What are fixed expenses that are in your life? How much rent is the city that you're going to work in, right? Will you have a car? Will you have insurance payments on that car? Do you have student loans that you'll start to have to pay back? So those are things kind of fixed in your life, things that you're going to continually be paying. And then you have to think about discretionary expenses. So things that, like food and clothes and entertainment and electronics, right? These are things that kind of go up and down every month. You're going to spend money on them, but kind of taking inventory of how much you usually spend, what you think you're going to have to spend when you're in that professional realm is really important in terms of knowing what your baseline needs are going to be in terms of that number. So if this is new to you, Successful Start has a lot of resources. One tracking app, budgeting and tracking app that's really cool is Mint. I believe it's free to download, and it really helps you kind of organize your expenses. So the first thing you have to know is kind of how much money at minimum do you need to live on. The next thing that you need to look into is considering kind of where your offer falls in line with the local market. So in order to determine the answer to this question, you must know what someone with your skills and level of experience is paid in similar roles in the same city. So that's a lot of things. So thinking about, okay, how many years have you been out of school? What's the degree that you have, right? What skills are you bringing to that role? You might be, have 3 summers where you've worked specifically on this skill that they're looking for. That's highly, valued. That's something to think about too. And then the city that you live in, salaries will differ dramatically depending on the cost of living. So if you're getting an entry level, social media coordinator position in San Francisco versus Raleigh, North Carolina, it's going to be dramatically different. You could be doing the exact same thing every day, but the cost of living is so high in San Francisco, that salary is going to be higher. So there are a few websites that come in really helpful or handy when you're trying to figure out this information, what people make, what is going to be that local market. Salary.com is one. And then Glassdoor also has a salary calculator. You can also hear my screaming toddler in the background, probably. I apologize. Okay, so would it be helpful? People can just, I guess, do the thumbs up to see actually a demo of using one of these websites. It's pretty intuitive in terms of, plugging in the type of position in your city, but I'm happy to do.
Really quickly before you do that part, there was a question in the text chat. It was regarding the previous slide. How do you assess fit with a manager during the interview process? Are there good questions to ask?
That's great. I think that there are definitely a lot of good questions that you can ask. One is, what is your communication style? I think sharing different communication styles is important. How do you measure success? Maybe what would success look like in this role? Asking that question to the manager would give you a sense of kind of how they're going to be judging you, right? What are they going to look for in that workspace? So is it, clear indicators? Are they excited to watch you grow? So I think those are 2 clear questions. And then I would just say kind of getting a sense of other people in the workplace. If that manager also manages other people, you can ask kind of what kind of leader. You can ask a question in the interview with other people. What kind of leader is this person? Is this boss? What's their leadership style? You could ask the manager directly, what's their leadership style? I think that usually is really telling. And you could get a sense of whether that's going to work for you. If you really appreciate tough love and you like some clear structured deadlines, right? That might be something that you're looking for. But maybe you're somebody who it's really about that relationship and empathy and kind of mentoring. So you'll kind of get that sense by asking some of those questions. Is there another question? I heard a little ding. No?
Nope, there are no other questions in the chat right now. If one comes up and you can't see it, I can let you know.
Okay, great. Okay. So salary.com, glassdoor.com, really great calculators to use to understand that, again, what an entry-level salary looks like, or a middle manager salary look like in a different area. So another thing to note is that depending on your industry and of course location, like I just chatted about, there are going to be vastly different starting salaries, right? If you're graduating from undergrad or graduate programs, depending on the industry that you're applying to, it's going to be very different. So that might be tough because if you have a roommate, right, you're at that point, people are starting to have offers come in, you start having a conversation. The number that your roommate may be offered might be incredibly different from what you have. And you have to know, okay, you know, what's normal in this line of work in this city. So don't compare yourself against just random other people. It's really use these tools to understand if this is a good offer or not. Okay. So there are a few other questions that you want to consider about the salary specifically. And one is, will you get a signing bonus? Another is, does the salary include commission or incentives? So if you're going into sometimes sales jobs, you have, you know, key indications of success. And if you hit those, then, you know, you sell a certain amount of things, you get a bonus, right? You have a baseline salary, maybe it's smaller, but then if you sell X amount, you get 10,000 more per year. If you sell Y amount, you get 20,000. So you kind of have to pay attention to that because the baseline could be really small, but then you have this opportunity to really make a lot of money based on kind of that bonus system. So that's important to know as well. Okay. I want to just say before we continue that also being aware that salary negotiation is not always possible. So some organizations provide completely identical compensation packages to all new hires. And therefore you would really need to demonstrate extraordinary unique value in order to kind of negotiate for any additional monetary compensation. That being said, it's always worth asking for flexibility if you feel like that offered amount is less than the normal range for someone in your position. So it really depends, again, on where you're coming from. If you are a senior right now or an undergraduate versus a graduate student or a career changer, someone who's entering a new field, it's going to be different. And we'll talk about that. But depending on that industry, your years of experience, what's possible is different.
There's a question in the text chat.
Okay.
Is the first salary offer usually on the low end, meaning your counteroffer should be higher than what you usually deserve, what you actually deserve, then you and the potential employer meet somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that in just 1 second. So I'll be sure to answer that question. But we're going to talk about why negotiating is important just for a minute, because I think it's important to talk about this. And, you know, you're all here, so clearly you think it's important too, which is great. But sometimes people think that this topic is, you know, just for people in business, just for people in certain lines of work. And while it's probably true that you may, you know, if you're working for a bank or a big for-profit company, there's more room for negotiation. It's incredibly important to feel comfortable with this topic and with this skill, because if you're thinking big picture, right, each salary acts as a benchmark for your future earning potential. So each of your salaries really is built off of your last one. According to researchers, assuming that you get a 5% average annual pay increase over a 40-year career, which is a lot in the current recession, but a 25-year-old who negotiated a starting salary of $55,000 will earn $634,000 more than a non-negotiator who accepted an initial offer of $50,000, right? So again, if you make that $5,000 a little bit more, that first entry-level job kind of that earning potential is going to go up quite a bit over the course of your lifetime. So negotiating also shows your employer that you've done your research regarding your relative worth in the current labor market, right? So if they do lowball you and they give you something on that like low end, and you know from your research that that's not quite what you're worth, what other folks are paying, you know, showing that you've done that research will be impressive to them and maybe make them more apt to continue that conversation. And engaging in conversation about salary promotes pay transparency. So challenging employers to re-examine their compensation strategy. So if we were all transparent about kind of how much we made, there probably wouldn't be such huge equity issues. But because it's so private, it's possible and it's probable, and it is, that people in similar positions are not getting the same benefits. They're not necessarily getting the same amount of money based on kind of subjective things. Sometimes it's a real hard skill. Sometimes it's an extra degree. Other times it may be that someone knows how to negotiate a little bit better. So let's all feel good about that skill so that we can at least be equitable on that front. And I encourage you to talk to people in your industry, if you can, about salary. Be transparent. It's a little uncomfortable, but it helps other people understand kind of what that baseline is and what they're really worth. Just some more additional information that I think is important, but over her working life, a woman on average will earn $1 million less than a man simply because she's a woman. And the wage gap between men and women right now is the result of a variety of forms of sex discrimination in the workplace, including discrimination in hiring, promotion, pay, occupational segregation by industry, bias against mothers, and other ways in which women workers and women's work are undervalued. So there's a lot more there that we could talk about, but just know that a lot of times women don't feel quite as comfortable negotiating as men, and that it's important to ask for flexibility and at least start that conversation.
There was a question following up on some of the material that you brought up. The question is, how do you know if the package offered is non-negotiable?
You ask. So sometimes if you're going into certain industries like nonprofits, sometimes, or if you're going into a program that is like a government program, it's very structured, we're hiring 5 people to do this job, they'll tell you right from the get-go. Sometimes there'll be a hiring salary range or a hiring salary right on that application right from the beginning that, you know, this is a union job, say, and this is the amount of money that people on this level get paid. Then when you get promoted, this is the amount of money. I worked at a nonprofit down the street, WGBH, when I first graduated from Boston College quite some time ago, and I got hired as entry-level person, and they said, this is the amount of money you get paid, you're a part of the union, right? And then if you were to get a promotion, you would get this amount of money, and that was it, right? I was not able to negotiate, but I did have a conversation about, you know, how can I, you know, professionally develop? Can I go to conferences, things like that? But because it was a nonprofit, it was very structured, it was unionized, I didn't have that flexibility to negotiate. So simply asking, you want to ask for flexibility, and we're kind of getting to those strategies of how do you bring this up? What words do you say? But most of the time, if it's one of those very structured things, usually it's government, nonprofit, and there isn't room for flexibility, they'll probably make that known right from the get-go, because it's just a part of the job, and they don't want people to kind of be disillusioned when they're signing up. Okay, so here are some other things that you can negotiate. So we chatted a little bit about this, but obviously salary increase is something that you could potentially negotiate. Vacation time is another thing. Your work schedule. So if you were to work, 2 days from home a week because of whatever you have going on, that would be something that you could potentially negotiate. I just had a former coworker who was applying for a job. She was offered the job, and they said, you're going to be traveling 60% of the time. And she said, is there any way we can change that? And they said no. So she turned down the job because she said, I can't, with my personal life, I can't make that happen. And they called her back and they changed it. And now she only has to travel 20% of the time, right? So that was something that she was able to negotiate because they wanted her, her background and her skills in that role. So other things, we already talked about bonuses, but equity benefits, right? If you maybe work for a startup, right? You may have the opportunity to have equity benefits and profit sharing. Relocation assistance if you're moving across the country for a job is definitely something that you should bring up. Like it's going to, cost me X amount of money, $2,500 to ship everything I have from here to California in my U-Haul. Is there any way that you might be able to help me with some of those costs? Yeah, okay, so we already talked about some of these things, but so kind of down to the nitty gritty of this, some of those ways that you want to actually bring up this conversation. Okay, so going into the conversation, having done your research is incredibly important. So you want to know what your priorities are and deal breakers are before you begin negotiation. So we'll talk about exactly how to come up with that number in just 1 second, but also know kind of from this slide, right? If salary isn't an option to negotiate, right? But this deal like isn't quite, what you were hoping for and it's not meeting your needs. What are the other things that you might want to bring up? Is it for you? Is it, flexibility in terms of work schedule? For you, is it vacation time because you know that you have something planned with your family at the end of the year? So kind of keeping in mind what are these important things for you that you could kind of have on the ready before you go into that conversation. You also want to go into that conversation feeling confident with a reason for why you're negotiating, right? Again, not because, oh, I all of a sudden I have this extra bill, but talking about how your experiences and skill set make you uniquely qualified, right? So saying, I really think that my 4 years working specifically with, students in a career coaching setting is going to help, XYZ, right? So talking about feeling comfortable with your experiences and talking about how you're going to contribute to that team. So how you're going to be an asset to that team. A big question that is asked a lot is, do you bring up other offers right away? So say you have a few offers, one's higher than the other one, do you kind of bring it up, rub it in their faces right away? I would say not right away. I wouldn't necessarily bring that up because you don't ever want them to think that you're threatening them or that you're anything other than excited and trying to make this work, right? Throughout this whole process, you want to be, if you do want the job, but you want to negotiate, right? You want to be gracious. You want to be excited and thank them so much and continue your enthusiasm for the role. That positive attitude is really going to help in this negotiation process. So threatening them isn't something great, right? They're probably not going to want to work with you at that point. But you can mention there are other opportunities that you're considering, right? If it's really something that if you're feeling like they're not providing you with the package that you need or that you're worth, saying, okay, this is helpful. Is there any way that we could talk about the flexibility of this package? I am looking at some other offers, but I really want to make this one work, right? That's something that you could say to bring up. Most salary questions that arise early are screening questions to make sure your salary fits with the company's range. So negotiation comes later when you have a formal offer in hand. You can ask if there's a salary range for the position. So you can say, something like, I'm sure we can negotiate a mutually agreeable salary within that range once I'm offered a position. If someone asks you kind of what you're hoping for in a salary, or how much you want to make, sometimes that happens really early on in the interview process because they want to get a sense of what people think they're worth. Try not to answer that and try not to give a number if you can. So one way to deflect would be saying something like, well, without knowing more about this position and the benefits package, it's hard to know what salary I should expect. But my research suggests that the salary range for entry level blank is between X and Y. So you've done that research, right? This is what's fair. It includes the low, it includes the high too. So it's probably a good range for bringing it toward them. But you don't have to say exactly what it is, because you say, I really want to learn more about this specific position and what's, it's going to be like before giving a number. Sometimes people ask you specifically, how does this relate to the salary that you've made in the past? In some states, it's illegal for them to actually ask you how much money you're making in your current or past job, but sometimes it still happens. So again, you could kind of deflect and say, I really think that I want to learn more about this position because I think it's different than my last position and it's not really comparable. So negotiations, if you can, I would say do them over the phone or in person, because it allows you to pick up on tone and body language cues. Not everyone is comfortable with that, and that's okay. But I think if you're on the phone and you've practiced and you've done your research, right, really being confident in your numbers that you're going to bring to the table is a really good way of kind of getting a sense of, that question someone asked earlier, how do you know if something is negotiable? Well, at talking to the person that works in HR, or if it's your manager, and saying, I'm really wondering if there's flexibility here, and just having an open-ended question like that, and seeing what they say, right? How do they answer? How do they respond? Picking up on some of those cues. If they're like, listen, I really want you to join, but I promise you that everyone makes X amount of money. We're in a union. I can show you the website. Like, I don't know anything else I can do for you, but like, please, read this, and this is what the job is. That's one thing. But then they could say, if they come back at you with, well, what are you expecting, right? That's maybe a cue. There is a little bit of room for negotiation. You have to be comfortable with silence, which is super hard in this type of situation for some of us. I definitely can say it is for me, but you can use it, right? Give the other person and yourself some time to think, right? So if they ask you a question, trying to get that number out, you can think for a second, okay, how do I deflect this question, or how do I turn it back on them? So you want to leave wiggle room as much as possible by offering a range. So if they make you say a number, you say, well, based on my research and my skills, I really believe that between X and Z would be a fair salary for this position. And how do you get to that number? How do you get to your range? So it's based on two things. So first of all, knowing what your minimum amount that you need to live on is, right? So have that somewhere. And then looking at, salary.com, looking at kind of the median range for a job in that industry, in that city, with your skill set, kind of looking at what the bottom number is. Sorry, the background here is not conducive. So looking at the median range, knowing that this was a question too, most likely you're going to get an offer that's in the bottom half, right, of the bell curve with the median range, right? So if you are looking at your baseline number, you can't live anything below that, that's one thing. But then you're going to look at what's normal, right? What's that median? Hopefully what's normal is above what you need. And then you can kind of make that decision about whatever they offered you. Say it's, a little bit less than the median. You have to figure out for you, what's your bottom number? What's your bottom line that you are not willing to take any less than? So knowing what you should get paid, what the median is paid in that area, right? Kind of coming up with a secret number in your head that you will not take anything less than, right? So knowing that if they offer you, say, $80,000 a year, and you know that the median is 90, but you only need 60 to live, are you okay with taking, I don't know, 75 or 70, or you have to figure out kind of what it is, what your bottom line number is. So bringing a range you know, to the meeting, knowing that, you know, the bottom of your range is really going to be that bottom line number that you would go below, and not what you need to survive, but the bottom line based on your research that you've done too, and bringing that to the table. So another strategy, just thinking about how you would bring this up, is you want to kind of talk about we. So think about, how can we make this work? I really want to make this work. Frame it in a way that acknowledges the employer's perspectives and your benefits for the team. Avoid negative framing. So never start off a sentence with, you probably won't agree to this, but, so this sets up the other person to act kind of defensively. And a good strategy to overcome the concern of kind of reputational risks of negotiating that often act as a barrier for women is to think about negotiating from a communal orientation. So again, focusing on what you can do for them. Like, I really want to take this opportunity because I think that this would help with this issue, or like, my skills here really help this team to do this, right? Great. So I think I threw a lot at you just then. And I have some more. So don't ask questions that could have been researched, right? So you want to get this offer in written form, right? If they give you a verbal offer, ask for it in written forms. You can do your thorough research, right? And like I chatted about, it's unlawful in some states to ask for your current salary in an interview. Sometimes you can say, I'm open and flexible, right? I want to learn more about the position if they ask you on an application. If they start mentioning numbers, you can say, thank you for sharing that information. Yep, you don't have to say, that sounds great, right? Try not to hint at what makes sense for you. After the offer, ask if they have time for questions. And that's when you can say, you know, is there any flexibility on the starting salary? Or sometimes you can ask for some time and say, I really have to think about that and do some research. And then when you get back to them, say, could we have a conversation? I'm really wondering if there's flexibility, or we can have a conversation with that salary. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here. I have a lot of other things, but I feel like we are running up against time. So what questions do you have? And I'll see if there's anything else that I haven't quite hit yet.
I got one. Is there ever a time when it's considered not beneficial to negotiate? Obviously, if there's no negotiation room, you can't do it then. But is there any situation that you would say avoid, or just always kind of go for it, give it a shot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's another awesome guide, kind of infographic, like when you should negotiate, why you should negotiate, that I can send to you after the presentation as well. I would say that, you know, you may know when you get a really sweet offer, right? There are a lot of folks who are graduating from different programs at BC, and they come into my office and they're like, is this a good offer? And I'm like, yes, that's a great offer. So you should know that. If you've done your homework, you're going to know that, okay? That being said, if you feel, you know, that you want to ask if there's flexibility, you can be incredibly gracious, saying, well, I'm super excited about this, right? Wow, this looks like a great offer. I'm curious if there's any flexibility here on that salary. Just asking that one kind of open-ended question is going to give you a sense too of yes or no. And if they're like, no, like we really gave you everything because we would like you to join, you have to think about, are there other people that, you know, are well qualified for this position? Could they easily find someone else for this position that would take this salary, right? Is there a reason that you're thinking that you know, do you just want more money? I mean, we all would love, you know, the most money, but, or do you feel like, you know, you're being undersold a little bit, or something's not working for you and like, you know, you're going to have to figure out the transportation, or like there's a real problem. So I think always asking for flexibility, even if it's a sweet deal, is great. Maybe they'll open a conversation. But if you know that, you know, a lot of entry-level positions, you know, they're going to give you a package, and if it looks good, if you're excited about that job, right? If there are other people who could easily kind of take that job, then, you know, you might have to be like, okay, thanks. And you accept. I mean, eventually you're going to accept a job offer, right? So I think asking in a really positive way, like, you know, is there any room for negotiation here? Or flexibility, right? You can see what they say, but if they say kind of no, or like, we give you best shot, you kind of have to make that decision whether to push further and potentially, you know, make things a little bit awkward. And sometimes you should absolutely do that. That's why we're having this conversation. But if in other cases you feel like this is a good offer based on my research and what I need, and it's lucrative, I'm excited about this position, I would say that's when you take the job.
Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned previously that your salary negotiation kind of builds on your previous salaries. What does negotiation look like if you're completely changing industries? Say like from construction to accountant.
Absolutely. And that's what the perfect time to say, you know, if they ask you about a previous salary or what you're expecting, you know, of the salary, that's why doing your research would be really important. And you're kind of deflecting saying, you know, I'm a career changer. And actually, you know, I don't think that my current role or my last position would be comparable in terms of the job function or industry at all. So I'd really like to talk about this and what's a good, you know, salary for this local market or my research, right? So doing your research and having those facts going into the conversation is really going to arm you with the information to have that conversation. Really focusing on that, right? If you do that and you do ask to negotiate and you feel comfortable with what is equitable, right? What you should be getting paid based on your skill set, then the idea is that hopefully you're going to get your worth as much as possible, so that each time you can incrementally, you know, accumulate more money. But if you don't do that, if you don't know what you're worth, and they're thinking, hey, this person is going from construction to all of a sudden has a computer science degree, they may not know, you know, that with this computer science degree paid, right? So again, doing that research is going to help you understand what you might be worth.
Is verbal offer legally binding? Verbal or the email offers?
No, I would say get an offer in writing, definitely. If you are participating in the on-campus recruiting program, so if you applied and are, I guess we're not interviewing on campus anymore, but are applied through Handshake and they're recruiting specifically at BC, and you're getting an interview set up through the Career Center, that there's actually a policy that employers should abide by that says that students should have 3 weeks from the written offer to make a decision. And that is on our website. If you look under the employer recruitment section, that whole policy for what they have to abide by is under that section.
There's a question in the text chat. When it comes to pushing back the start date, what would be considered a reasonable amount of time to ask for?
I think it really depends, you know, on the situation, why you're negotiating a start date, what the reason is. So I think if you have, I mean, again, if it's, you really want this job, but hey, wouldn't it be cool knowing that I have a job that I travel for 3 months across the country? If they, you know, when they interviewed, were thinking that you were going to start in a month because they have a project that they really need to, you know, have you start on, then that, I don't know if I would say that. So I think it's have a legitimate reason that may be good. And again, they're going to talk to you about why they're hiring you. Is this like a cohort program where they have 20 other people in a class starting as the entry-level accountants, and you have a whole training together at a specific date, and then like professional development and meetings, right? You don't want to miss out on that. That actually happens a lot with entry-level positions. You're kind of hired with a cohort or other people and you're trained together. So you'd want to be a part of that. So it really depends. It's contextual. So I have up on the screen here some of the websites that I was mentioning, and that some really helpful information. So you can either take a screenshot of that, and again, I can send out resources for the folks that were logged on to this Zoom afterwards, if that's helpful. Last things to just remember, don't be afraid to ask. Again, even if it's a great offer, you know, asking in a nice way, kind of, is there any room for flexibility, or can we talk about this package a little bit? I have some questions. Is there any wiggle room? Things like that can get you into that conversation, and really picking up on those clues about whether, you know, you can ask about one thing or the other, and knowing what you want to ask about ahead of time, so you're prepared and you feel comfortable going into that conversation. If they won't budge on the salary, that's when you can move on to other forms of compensation. Yeah, like I said, you can ask to think about it and get back to them. Yeah, and we feel strongly in the Career Center, kind of, if you do agree to an offer, right, then you're agreeing to that employment. So make sure you feel comfortable when you're saying yes to something, because you wouldn't want to go back on your agreement, because you could cause problems down the road for yourself. Okay. Anything else?
There is one last question that just came in on the chat. How long do people give to look over an offer?
That varies too. Again, if you're going through the on-campus recruiting program, we say we'd like students to have 3 weeks to think about this. It's usually not how much time normal folks get. It's usually a week or so. But they want to hear. If they give you an offer, they want to hear from you, right? So I think that it's completely reasonable to take a couple days to do your research, to really look through the benefits package and think about it. But then I would say don't necessarily play a game or stretch it out any longer than you have to. If you know you want to have a conversation and try to negotiate and see if there's flexibility, then I would set up a call and have a conversation with them right away. It depends on industry as well, how many people work for that organization, if it's a structured HR department or if it's a small, you know, department. I think you can always ask for an extension, again, in a really gracious way. If you have something critical that you need to figure out before a certain time period, if you have another job offer coming in, you know, you can ask for a little bit of an extension, but any more than a couple weeks is usually not going to be okay with the employer.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If, like, right off the bat, even before negotiating, you have a pretty good offer that you'd be satisfied with, and you haven't even had to negotiate, should you still try to, like, stretch it a little more and negotiate a little bit, even for, like, benefits or something like that?
Yeah, again, I think it really, it's, if you've done your research and you think that, I mean, I think the thing is, when I graduated from college, when many people come into my office with their offers, you know, any salary is exciting, right? So you're like, great, I can live off of this. I have a job, I want to take this, right? But it may be way under kind of what you are worth, right? So making sure to do that research. And if, again, like if it is a good offer for you, but also in the local market, and you're excited about the job, I encourage you to still ask the question, right? So that's what this research on women oftentimes don't ask that question, right? Or sometimes, you know, people, if you're a little more shy, you might not ask that question. So I think it's, again, being gracious, knowing what you're worth, and saying kind of, you know, is there any room for flexibility? And again, if they read that cue, if they say, no, this is our best offer, and you're really excited about it, then okay, right, you can take it. But it's really about reading the cues, knowing kind of, again, that research. I hope that's helpful.
Yep, thank you.
I think practicing with friends, career coaches, you can certainly make appointments with us to have these types of conversations, but saying out loud some of these things that may feel like awkward at first or something you haven't talked about before is super helpful for when you're getting into the actual conversation, so that you feel comfortable saying, you know, I was really thinking this salary, is there anything we can do or, you know, just having those small sound bites that may be really nerve-wracking to get out, practicing them with a friend or, you know, someone trusted is definitely helpful in when you're having that conversation. Great. Well, feel free to email me. Again, my name is Julianne Smith. I'm at the Career Center if you have any follow-up questions. And I will send resources around to folks who are here after the fact. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julianne.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julianne, as well for presenting with us tonight. I will end this call, and I will share the recording with you as well.
Awesome. If you could send the attendee list as well, so I could just send some stuff out to them, that would be really helpful.
Sure. I have the
Yeah.
I have the list. Let me stop the recording here, actually.